Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We will begin with chapter 12, verse 17. We have the chapter 12, verse 17. We have the story of Avram and Sarah going down to Egypt. Paro hears about this beautiful woman. Avram introduces himself and Sarah as being siblings, not spouses. Paro takes Sarah to be with him. They give Avram as the brother, the alleged brother of Sarah, they give him great gifts so that they can have her hand, Paro can have her hand in marriage. And now in verse 17, God brought great afflictions upon Paro and his household. Rashi brings down a very interesting medrash that says actually the physical act of sexual intercourse was difficult for Paro because of his afflictions. That was a pretty strong sign as to what was going on. Aldvar Sarai Eishes Avram. Now, the way we would translate it is on the matter of Sarai, the wife of Avram, because he was, obviously doing something that not pleasant for Sarai, who was a married woman, though Paro presumably did not know that she was a married woman. This word dvar could mean matter. Dvar also could mean word. And you have to ask yourself, did we not realize that Sarai was Avram's wife? Did we not know that yet in the story? I mean, let's say would have said in the pasuk, because of the matter of Sarai, wouldn't we have understood what the issue was? So there's a Kli Yakar over here, Kli Yakar on pasuk Yud Zayin. Al dvar Sarai es Avram. Did we not yet know that Sarai was Avram's wife? So this is a very basic question. What did Paro do wrong? They checked it out. They were told that Sarah, again, perhaps consent wasn't such a strong concept in Egyptian society, but in terms of the issue, that of course is a big deal, but in terms of the issue of she's a married woman, how could you, how's Paro supposed to know? They said she wasn't a married woman. Rashi brings down a very interesting medrash that what it means, al-dvar, which could be translated on the word of, is that Sarai instructed an angel of God to strike Paro, and the angel did so. So the Kli Yakar says that's a really interesting medrash. It doesn't seem to be saying it anywhere in the pasuk. Where'd that come from? Okay, near Lefarish. Therefore, says the Kli Yakar, I think the pshat over here is as follows. She told the masses that she was Avram's sister. Mikomakom, leparo higido ha'emes. She Eishes Avram. It's a very novel idea from the Kli Yakar, certainly not the standard pshat, but the Kli Yakar says that perhaps she told Paro in private that she's a married woman. When you're telling the masses, who knows what these guys are going to do? So you'll tell the king. The king, he's a person of authority, a person of prominence. He won't do anything wrong. So she privately tells him, I'm actually a married woman. Paro didn't pay attention to her. Paro says, you're telling me, this is mixed messages. The first report I received from you is that you're single. Now you're telling me you're married. I'm going with the first version. Okay, Nego Hashem al dvar Sarai. Therefore, says the Kli Yakar, the pasuk says that God afflicted Paro on the word of Sarai, meaning bishvil shel dibura shel Sarai, because of the statement of Sarai. Umahi dibura. What did she say? Eishes Avram. Remember, we asked, why is that saying the pasuk she's Avram's wife? Al dvar Sarai es Avram. She told him she was Avram's wife. That's the point. Ki dibrei lo eishes Avram. V'amar Paro li Avram, lama marta chosihi, ki lecha yisimamin v'lo la. The Yakar says, now you understand a different meaning when the famous pasuk afterwards, when Paro realizes that this is strange and he finds out that she really is married to Avram, he says to Avram, why'd you tell me that she was your sister? I believed you. I didn't believe her. Why'd you tell me she was your sister? Ki choshavti ulu merisken k'dei linatzo menatash k'shu below ishus. I thought maybe it was just a minor thing. Maybe she just didn't want to have a sexual relationship with me. A little thing like that. Again, it's a different society. But if I would have known that you were married, I wouldn't have done anything. So that's just an interesting pshat. This is not the standard approach. Interesting pshat in the Kli Yakar. Okay, going on to chapter 13, verse 1. They leave Egypt. Vayal Avram Mitzrayim hu v'ishto v'chol asher lo v'lo timo hanekba. So Avram, his wife Sarai, everything they had, and Lot, they all left Egypt. Okay, it seems to be a very basic technical pasuk. Interesting Ramban on this pasuk, Ramban on pasuk Aleph, hu v'ishto v'chol asher lo dia. This teaches you shlo gazlu mimenu davar mikol hamatanos hagadolos shenasnu lo bavur Sarah shetiya lemelech. They gave Avram a lot of gifts. They gave Avram all those gifts because they wanted Sarah's hand in marriage for Paro, or Sarah's hand for Paro. And now it turns out that Sarai is not staying with Paro. So you might think that they would take everything back. It's interesting. The Ramban says you might think they would steal everything back, not ask Avram, just grab it back. They didn't make the claim to Avram, you tricked us. This was a mistaken gift. If we would have understood the context that she wasn't going to be with Paro, we would have never given you all those presents. V'zeh ma'aseh nes. Says the Ramban, this is miraculous. This is miraculous. After this crazy story, they end up leaving Egypt with all the things they were given, and the Egyptians didn't ask for anything back. And this, when you think about it, first of all, it seems to be a very interesting masa abos simon lebanim. In other words, they ultimately leave Egypt also with much wealth from the Egyptians. We know that's the story of the Exodus. It's an interesting thing to think about. But, and also in a very surprising context, that the Egyptians seem fine with them taking all these things. But the other thing that's so interesting is, this has been such a crazy ride for Avram and Sarai. Remember, they were told they would go to Israel, everything would be great. They get there, there's famine. Then they have to leave. Then they go to Egypt. Then there's this whole crazy thing with Paro and Sarai. Then they finally got out of that. And then, you see this very interesting silver lining that all of a sudden they're leaving with so much more wealth than they had. Remember, this is one of the things that God assured him, that I'll bless you with great wealth. So I think there's also a great significance. And Ramban says this is totally surprising that this occurred, this thing with the assets remaining with them. This presumably is a little bit of a message to Avram that things are going to turn around a little bit. Just an interesting thing to think about. Okay, moving on, chapter 13, verse 7, very famous story. Vayiriv, Bein Roe Miknei Avram, Uvein Roe Miknei Lot. Remember, Lot, Avram's nephew, has stayed with them the whole time. They now settle back in the land of Israel. I should have started one pasuk. Actually, let's go back to verse 5. Avram and Sarai owned a number of things. Lot had sheep, cattle, tents. He had some assets as well. Verse 6. There wasn't enough room for them all to be together. Between the two, Avram and Lot, they had a lot of cattle. And they couldn't stay in one area together. There wasn't enough grazing for them to occupy one area. Verse 7, there was then an argument between the shepherds of Avram and the shepherds of Lot. The Canaanites and Prezis were then living in the land. This end of the pasuk seems to be totally neither here nor there. And so then Avram says to Lot, listen, this is not good. Let's split up. That's what Avram says to Lot. What was the fight about? What was the issue? Ramban on pasuk Zayin. Vayiriv, Kasav Rashi, so Rashi says as follows. You know what the fight was? Lot's shepherds were taking the liberty of using other people's property to allow their animals to graze. And Avram's shepherds, attitude starts from the top, right? So Avram's shepherds said to Lot's shepherds, how can you do that? It's not our land. Who are you to take their land? Lot's shepherds weren't bothered by this. Avram's shepherds told them, you can't do that. V'heim omrim nitna haaretz la'Avram. So Lot's shepherds said, look, let's think about this for a second, guys. The land is going to Avram. V'lo ein yoresh. He has no heirs right now, other than Lot, he has no children. Avram has no children. Lot is his next of kin. Velot Yorsho. So Lot is going to be the one who inherits. Veins at Gezel. The land is as good as Avram's. God already told Avram that. Avram's not going to be around forever. It's ultimately going to be Lot's. So we're just claiming what's ours. So that's, as Rashi, is why the pasuk ends off by saying the Canaanim and the Prizim were still there, meaning it wasn't Avram's land yet. It wasn't his to take. And certainly not Lot's. So that's the famous measure as to what the dispute was between the shepherds of Avram and the shepherds of Lot. Says the Ramban, Vani Tama, I find this very difficult. Ki amatana shenever Lavram, Lizaro hoisa. Shenever Lamalo, Lizara Chvatena Zaratazos. Vehechi Rashanu Lot. Yeah, you want to focus on what God said to Avram? Avram said, I'm going to give it, God said to Avram, I'm going to give it to your offspring. So two things. First of all, he's clearly saying to Avram, it's not yours yet. But the bigger point is, if you're going to focus on what God said, God talks about Avram's offspring. You're not Avram's offspring, Lot. You're not the seed of Avram. So if you're going to focus on God's statement, what in the world are you talking about? He's not talking about you. Ulai shamu haroim hamatana v'tau. Va'akasuv omer gam l'lot gam lavram einenu ata. So he says maybe the pshat is that, as is our custom, the shepherds misunderstood things, right? They heard, a little information is a bad thing. So they knew this gift of the land of Israel to Avram, but all the details of it, who has time to read all the fine print? So the bottom line is it's as good as Avram's, and they didn't know the details. And if you would have understood the details, you would have understood this has nothing to do with love. But the bottom line is neither one of them are holding the land now. Well, if he's there, the problem was they had all these animals, and there wasn't sufficient room in the small amount of land that they had to occupy all the animals. So they were kind of hanging out in ownerless land, and so because there was such a tight spot, so the shepherds of Lot began to use land belonging to others. So that's a very interesting pshat. That's what the Ramban says. That it was basically goes with the Medrash, and he assumes that the shepherds of Lot misunderstood the dynamic of what was supposed to be. But he says he thinks the real pshat is there was an argument over grazing. Kilo naso some haaretz, because there wasn't enough space for them. V'kasher hayamikna Avram roe ba'achu hayu roe Lot boim bigvulam v'roim sham. Avram shepherds were using a certain spot, and Lot shepherds would show up there and graze there as well. V'nei Avram v'Lot hayu gerim v'toshavim ba'aretz. Avram and Lot did not own land there; they were just passers through. Upachad Avram pen yishma knani ba'prizi yoshev ba'aretz koved miknamdi v'yigarshum. Avram was very worried that the other residents of the area would see all this cattle that they're bringing around and throw them out, because they'd be worried that you mix into our land. Oh, Yaakov, some or maybe they'll just take our stuff. Maybe they'll attack us and take our livestock. Because this isn't Avram's land, and they're just trying to make do on like this ownerless area. And then whenever they found a decent ownerless area, Lot and his club show up, and then all of a sudden there's all these animals in this relatively small spot. What are the neighbors going to think? The point is, there's various people dwelling in that area. It's too tight a spot. So we have here 2+ possibilities as to what the argument was. So we had an interesting kliyakar on why Paro was punished for taking Sarai. We had an observation by the Ramban about how fascinating it was that they actually left with the gifts that they were originally given. And now we have a discussion with Rashi and the Ramban as to what the tension had been between the shepherds of Avram and the shepherds of Lot.